The true heiress returns from rebirth, leaving no survivors in the family. Reborn to the day before I was taken back to the Marquis estate, I looked at the smiling steward standing before me. This servant has come especially to bring the young lady home for a reunion. I stared directly into those eyes veiled with mockery, raised my hand, and the kitchen knife in my grasp embedded itself in his head. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now, the story begins. The steward died with a smile on his face. Before he could even finish the word reunion, he collapsed on the threshold of my thatched hut, his blood staining my straw sandals. I stared at my own rough, calloused hands, the kind commonly seen on a 14-year-old girl raised in the countryside. I had intended to slice off half of his head, but the kitchen knife was too dull, and I hadn't eaten enough these past few days. In the end, I failed, as I looked at the corpse at my feet. The reality of my rebirth slowly sank in, and an overwhelming wave of hatred surged through me, belated but fierce. I pulled the cleaver from the corpse and struck again, hacking madly at the body in a fit of rage. In my past life, it was this man who promised to take me home to meet my family, and it was also this man who, in the end, used fire tongs to personally shove a red-hot iron into my mouth. The sensation of my mouth's flesh burning still seems to linger in my throat and at the tip of my nose. By the time the cleaver was dulled and the corpse had become a mess of mangled flesh, I looked up to see several wild dogs from the mountains standing warily outside the courtyard. I dropped the kitchen knife, picked up the meat, and threw it in front of the wild dog. After eating the first piece, the wild dog instinctively ran to the pile of rotten meat and began feasting heartily. I sat on the low stool by the door, watching the wild dog fight over the food, and recalled the events of my past life. On this very day in my past life, the steward of the Marquis's residence came to my door, claiming that I was the true daughter of the Marquis who had been abducted by thieves right after birth. My parents and elder brother searched for me for 14 long years, and as soon as they found me, they immediately sent him to bring me back. But when I returned to the Marquis's residence with the person who came to fetch me, overjoyed, I discovered that everything was a lie. After I was stolen away, the Marquis's household had long since found a little girl to take my place. Over these 14 years, Wen Chenyaro was cherished and spoiled by her parents and elder brother, and they had long forgotten about me, who was left adrift outside. In fact, they had already known my whereabouts 7 years ago. On the eve of the day they planned to bring me back, Wen Chenyaro had a nightmare at night and cried, saying her parents were going to abandon her. On one side was the daughter they had cherished and raised for 7 years, and on the other was me, a wild child who had grown up in the countryside with no manners. They gave up on me almost without hesitation. It wasn't until a poor scholar came to the Marquis's residence with a marriage contract and a jade pendant, asking to marry the legitimate daughter, that they sent someone to bring me back. But the scholar looked down on me for having grown up in the countryside. As soon as he saw me, he threw down the marriage contract, took the silver, and ran away. My parents and elder brother thought I had disgraced the Marquis household, and when Chenyaro also said every day that seeing me made her sad, they abandoned me in a side courtyard to fend for myself, where I barely survived for 2 years in tattered clothes and without enough food, until I was seen by a distinguished guest while fighting for food with Wen Chenyaro's little dog. Wen Chenyaro was furious, bluntly stating that I had frightened the distinguished guest and caused her to lose face. "You love eating so much, then let you eat your fill." The moment before the red-hot iron was shoved into my mouth, I was reborn. I was reborn on the day before I was taken back to the Marquis's estate. I was still living in a small, dilapidated thatched hut halfway up the mountain, an orphan girl named Peng Hao with no parents. After the wild dog had its fill, it wagged its tail at me and left. Only then did I stand up from the low stool, walk to the river to wash off the bloodstains, change into clean clothes, and take out a bundle to pack my valuables. Finally, holding the urn, I set fire to the house I had lived in for 14 years. The urn contained the ashes of old Chi, the barefoot doctor who found me, and he was the one who gave me my name. He said when he found me, I was barely breathing, and with his limited medical skills, mostly for treating bruises and sprains, someone like me was unlikely to survive. But I survived, thanks to the thin rice porridge he fed me and the cheap herbs he picked by the roadside. He named me Peng Hao, hoping my life would be as vigorous as the wild artemisia growing by the roadside. But I did not live up to his expectations. My life was as fragile as paper, and I died a miserable death. I had no surname, because he said he was a lone star destined to bring calamity. Unwilling to let me take his name, even on his deathbed, he forbade me from calling him grandfather. All he left me was a token from the Cloudscatter Manor, saying he had once saved the Manor Lord's life, and this token could make him do one thing for me. In my previous life, I didn't know where Cloud Scatter Manor was or what it did. Since I could manage life on my own, I simply regarded it as a memento old Chi left me. Later, when I returned to the Marquis Manor, this token, along with my bundle and old Chi's ashes, was discarded like trash. I watched their retreating figures and wanted to chase after them to snatch it back, but before I could even step out of the main gate, I was dragged back to the small courtyard by the matron who came to teach me etiquette. It wasn't until right before my death that Wen Qianyao smugly told me that the token hadn't been thrown away. Instead, it had been taken by the Marquis Manor's second young master, Wen Qianjing, who yearned for the chivalrous ways of the martial world, and became his stepping stone to apprenticeship. Wen Qianjing even won the martial arts champion title with the skills he learned at the Yun San Villa, and his official career flourished. In this life, I held the token and traveled day and night, asking for directions along the way. It took me 3 months to finally knock on the door of the Yun San Villa. The head of the villa saw my disheveled appearance, the urn of ashes and the token in my arms, and asked if I wanted revenge or a safe place to stay. I swallowed hard, my voice hoarse. I want to learn martial arts. I settled down at the Yun San Villa. The head of the villa didn't ask why I wanted to learn martial arts, but simply found me a master within the villa. My master was a man of few words. From the very beginning, his way of teaching me was to first beat me up, then show me how to dodge the moves he had just used. As I grew older, with more food and training over the past couple of years, I became much stronger than the average woman. My master then began teaching me how to use various weapons and even brought in an equally taciturn pharmacist to teach me how to use poison. On a certain day when I turned 18, I finally managed to hold my own against my master for 300 moves without being overpowered. Calmly, he told me I was ready to leave his tutelage. The next day, both my master and the pharmacist vanished without a trace. I carefully cleaned the courtyard, shouldered my baggage, and set off on the road back to the capital. I didn't have the necessary entry documents to enter the city, so I had originally planned to wait for a merchant caravan returning to the capital and slip in with them. However, as soon as I reached the outskirts, I encountered a few young noble scions on horseback, chasing a girl of about 15 or 16 through the woods. I had seen a few of these scoundrels in my previous life. They were friends of the third young master of the Marquis's household, Wen Qiantong. Wen Qiantong was not as clever as the eldest son, Wen Qiancheng, who had entered the court early to serve as an official, nor was he as strong and capable as the second son, Wen Qianjing, who could take the military examinations. He was simply the most common type of wastrel in the capital, but he had the best relationship with Wen Qianyao. As the most idle person in the Marquis residence, he often brought his good-for-nothing friends to the mansion to tease me, just to vent Wen Qianyao's anger, so these few playboys all had grudges against me. Without hesitation, I hid behind a tree with my knife in hand. As the young girl ran past, I beheaded the playboy riding at the front with a single slash. The head landed in the arms of the person behind him. His headless body was carried forward by the horse for a few steps before falling to the ground. The others behind him tightened their reins, staring in horror at the scene before them. I stood before them with a knife in hand, my gaze as calm as an ancient well, sweeping over each of their faces one by one. Who are you? Do you know who you've killed? One of the dandies spoke with a trembling voice. I didn't answer, only asking, which one of you is Wen Qiantong? Everyone was terrified, thinking that Wen Qiantong had brought this fatal disaster upon them by causing trouble outside. Of course I said that on purpose. I would never forget Wen Qiantong's face even if I became a ghost. I just wanted to use their mouths to scare that good-for-nothing first. After asking, I didn't wait for their response and charged forward, cutting off one of their heads. I remember this person had followed Wen Qiantong to mock me in our previous life. Then, I mounted his horse, turned it around, and galloped toward the fleeing dandies. My goal was clear. I only killed those who had wronged me, before they could escape the forest. I successfully beheaded the other 4 and watched as the remaining few fled back to the capital. I imagined the expression Wen Qiantong would have upon learning that his death warrant was already on its way. I cheerfully rode my horse to collect the heads of those men, only to run straight into the young girl who had fled earlier. She stared in horror at the heads in my hands, so frightened that she fell to the ground, begging me repeatedly not to kill her. I won't kill you, I said, casually tossing the money pouch I had looted from the corpses in front of her. Go home, and pretend you didn't see anything that happened today. She stared at me for a long time, and only when she realized I truly meant her no harm did she tremblingly pick up the purse, stumbling every few steps as she ran away. I found a random pond to wash the blood off my face and the knife, then buried my blood-stained coat on the spot before returning to the main road to wait for the merchant caravan. Half an hour later, I sneaked into the capital hidden among the caravan's goods. just in time to see a few young dandies leading constables out of the city. The capital has been gripped by panic lately. In the time it took for a spring outing, 6 young nobles were found decapitated, their heads missing. The heads that neither the officials nor the Dali temple could find, despite their full-scale search, mysteriously appeared in their respective bedrooms the very next day. Survivors claimed the assailant was masked, with a tall and sturdy build like a woman, a hoarse voice, and strength and methods fiercer than the average man. The bandits specifically demanded to find Wen Qiantong, the third young master of the Chongqing Marquis Manor, and the 6 people killed happened to be Wen Qiantong's closest friends. This caused quite a stir in the Chongqing Marquis Manor. The families of the deceased children came knocking every day, demanding an explanation from Wen Qiantong. It was clearly he who had brought this fatal disaster upon himself, so why were innocent people suffering along with him? Wen Qiantong himself was terrified out of his wits. Though he was accustomed to bullying men and harassing women, he had never dared to provoke anyone with a powerful background or family connections. He racked his brains but couldn't figure out who would dare to retaliate against him with such ruthless methods. He shut himself in his room all day long, while the Marquis and his wife assigned 3 times the usual number of servants and guards to patrol his courtyard. The eldest brother, Wen Qiancheng, kept pressuring the Dali temple to find the killer as soon as possible. The second brother, Wen Qianjing, who knew martial arts, even moved into his courtyard to live with him. The younger sister, Wen Qianyao, disregarding the danger, went to the temple to pray for a protective talisman for him. The entire Chongqing Marquis family worked together, running around to protect Wen Qiantong. Hidden among the servants, I watched coldly, feeling nothing but disgust in my heart. This harmonious family, just to prevent their beloved sister from marrying down and suffering, would ruin my life. Are you the only ones in this world who count as human? Am I not human too? I clearly did nothing wrong. Even though I was left to wander the countryside since childhood, I never once complained about fate. Why should I suffer such a sudden disaster? I thought that after 4 years of martial arts training, the overwhelming rage I felt when I killed the steward back then had long subsided, but when faced with this disgusting scene again, I couldn't hide the murderous intent in my eyes. Watching Wen Qianjing patrol the grounds with his servants, I suddenly had an idea. In the latter half of the night, a fire suddenly broke out in Wen Qiantong's courtyard. Wen Qianjing immediately rushed out of the burning building with the unconscious Wen Qiantong, just in time to see a dark figure leap over the high wall and escape. Without a second thought, Wen Qianjing immediately gave chase, but the shadowy figure moved with an eerie agility. No matter how hard he pursued, he always remained one step behind. Just as he was growing frustrated, Wen Qianjing saw the shadowy figure seemingly twist an ankle and tumble straight into a courtyard. Overjoyed, Wen Qianjing immediately scaled the wall and dropped into the yard. The moment his feet touched the ground, they were caught in animal traps. His piercing cry of pain was cut short as I emerged from behind him, one hand twisting his arms behind his back while the other pressed a handkerchief firmly over his mouth and nose. His eyes were wide with fury. I leaned close to his ear and whispered softly, "Wen Qianjing, do you recognize me?" Wen Qianjing glanced sideways at me when he saw my face. He froze for a moment, but then the drug took effect. His struggling gradually ceased, and I didn't let go until he fell unconscious. Looking at the unresponsive Wen Qianjing, I recalled my past life. He had been studying at the cloud-scattered manor for less than a year before he was expelled for bullying his fellow disciples. The manor lord said he had a vile nature and was unfit for any important role. Feeling humiliated, he took out his anger on me as soon as he returned to the residence. He broke both my legs, tore my clothes, and threw me out onto the street, promising that if I could crawl back to the Marquis's estate, he would have someone treat my legs. He was in the tea house, watching me crawl under the gaze of the crowd, laughing with his servants at how I looked like a stray dog. Little did he expect that someone would report the incident to the authorities. Afraid that my identity would be exposed and that his unauthorized act of taking me away from the Marquis's estate would cause a scandal, he immediately ordered his servants to throw me back into the side courtyard to fend for myself. I tried to set the bones myself using the method old Qi had once taught me, but my feet were left permanently disabled. I now walk with an unsteady, stumbling gait, and on damp or rainy days, the pain becomes unbearable. The piercing pain still seems etched in my memory. If I don't make Wen Qianjing experience it firsthand, this hatred will never be resolved. Retrieving the axe I had hidden beforehand by the wall, I first chopped off his feet trapped in the animal's snare, making sure that even if he was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat, he wouldn't wake up from his unconscious state. As the sky began to lighten, I sprinkled a specially prepared poison on the wounds of his severed legs. stripped him naked, and dumped him on Vermilion Bird Street. As dawn broke, the effects of the drug wore off, and the pain forced Wen Qianjing to open his eyes, followed immediately by a scream like a slaughtered pig. The shopkeepers on both sides of the street, awakened by the noise, opened their doors to a horrifying scene. Wen Qianjing, with both legs severed, crawled and howled, leaving a long trail of blood behind him. Wen Qianjing was quickly taken back to the Marquis of Chongqing's residence by the servants who rushed to the scene for treatment. Not long after, Wen Qiancheng was seen galloping into the palace on horseback to summon the imperial physician. The bleeding from the wounds on Wen Qianjing's legs could not be stopped. The household physician knew it was due to poisoning, but there was nothing he could do. Wherever the horse's hooves trod, pedestrians scrambled to get out of the way, nearly becoming victims under its feet. Yet Wen Qiancheng didn't even spare them a glance. In his wake, pedestrians, merchants, and street stalls were thrown into chaos. Just as the palace gates loomed close, I, who had been following him all along, struck the horse's leg with a stone. Wen Qiancheng immediately fell, bleeding and unconscious. He happened to be seen by a colleague, who carried him to the imperial hospital for treatment, delaying the care of Wen Qianjing back at the residence. By the time he woke up and returned to the mansion with the imperial physician, Wen Qianjing had already been dead for a long time due to pain and excessive blood loss. The next day, white funeral banners were hung at the entrance of the Chongqing Marquis residence, but everyone in the capital was too fearful for their own safety to associate with the family. Wen Qiancheng and Wen Qianjing's wife had already taken the children and fled back to their maternal home as soon as they heard that their brother-in-law had provoked a fatal disaster. Upon hearing the news of Wen Qianjing's death, his widow refused to return, sending a letter saying she would become a nun to pray for her deceased husband. Therefore, very few people came to pay their respects. But at this moment, the Marchioness of Chongqing, immersed in the grief of losing her son, was holding Wen Qianyao tightly, both of them weeping uncontrollably. Wen Qiantong knelt before the coffin, kowtowing and openly admitting that he was the one who caused his second brother's death. Wen Qiancheng grabbed Wen Qiantong and pulled him up, sternly demanding to know exactly whom he had offended. Yet he couldn't even remember the names of those he had bullied, only knowing that they were all ordinary commoners. "I don't know," Wen Qiantong cried, "I really don't know." The Dali Temple's investigation was making slow progress, and the entire Marquis estate was on high alert. After the Marquis of Chongqing and Wen Qiancheng had an all-night discussion and then went to see the emperor, they soon returned with a team of imperial guards, completely surrounding the Marquis of Chongqing's estate. No one inside could get out, and no one outside could get in. After observing for 2 days, I realized that forcing my way through would indeed be a long shot. So the next day, a woman handed a letter and a jade pendant to the imperial guards. "My lady's surname is Kui, her name is Yua, and she is carrying the Marquis's child," she cried out. The guards, sensing trouble, had no choice but to bring the woman, the letter, and the jade pendant to the Marquis of Chongqing. Kui Yua was the illegitimate daughter of the censor-in-chief and also the Marquis of Chongqing's mistress, kept outside the household, about the same age as Wen Qianyao. In my previous life, Kui Yua's existence had always been well hidden, at least until the time of my death. No one in the Wen family knew of her. A few days ago, when I entered the capital with the caravan, I happened to meet Kui Yua. The jade pendant hanging from her waist was exactly the one the scholar had brought when he came to propose marriage to Wen Qianyao. After making inquiries from various sources, I learned that in this lifetime, the scholar had also come to propose marriage. But not long after, he got drunk, stumbled, and drowned in the river. The shop assistant who discussed this matter with me said mysteriously, "They say he drowned, but I think it's clear that Marquis Chongqing, unwilling to let his daughter marry beneath her, was the one who struck the fatal blow." I sneered, understanding dawning in my heart. Back then, they sent the steward to find me, but the steward went missing, and my residence had already become a ruin, for the sake of his beloved little daughter. The scholar died, and that jade pendant was reproposed by him and given to his mistress. In his youth, when the old Marquis of Chongqing was critically ill, although he was the heir, he was not favored. Persecuted by his half-brothers, he fled and was rescued by the scholar's family. Later, he made a comeback and, before leaving, arranged a marriage to repay the scholar's family for saving his life, leaving the jade pendant as a token of promise. Yet in the end, he personally killed the only son of his benefactor. Despite having suffered persecution from his half-brothers, he still allowed his mistress to become pregnant. Everything was so absurd and laughable. After the imperial guards had surrounded the Marquis's residence with layers of protection, I abducted the mistress. I never actually believed that the Marquis of Chongqing would truly come to rescue Kui Yua. All I wanted was to expose these matters before the Marchioness of Chongqing. Thus, The fact that the Marquis of Chongqing had been keeping a mistress outside, one who was about the same age as his own daughter, was exposed, having just endured the pain of losing a child, and then suddenly learning that her husband, the man with whom she had weathered life's storms for a lifetime, who had once vowed to be with her and only her, had betrayed her. The Marchioness of Chongqing finally collapsed and fainted. When she woke again, half of her body was paralyzed. The residence physician said it was a stroke caused by the series of recent blows. When Marquis Chongqing arrived at the dilapidated temple mentioned in the letter with the imperial guards, he found Kui Yue safely sleeping inside. Marquis Chongqing immediately brought her back to his residence, completely disregarding his wife who had suffered a stroke and his 3 other children. When Kui Yue woke up and realized she had successfully entered the Marquis's residence, her fear of being kidnapped was instantly forgotten. Upon hearing that the Marchioness had suffered a stroke and was bedridden, she immediately began dreaming of becoming the new Marchioness. Meanwhile, I had already taken advantage of the Marquis leading the imperial guards to rescue Kui Yue to sneak into the residence and hide in the side courtyard where I had lived in my previous life. Although it was called a side courtyard, it was actually the place where the Marquis of Chongqing imprisoned and tormented his illegitimate younger brother after inheriting the title. Everyone in the Marquis's household believed the place was tainted with a heavy aura of bloodshed and had long been abandoned for years. I hid in the side courtyard for 5 days. I remembered that during the Mid-Autumn Festival banquet on the 5th day, the emperor was attacked, although he remained unharmed. The imperial guards could no longer stay at the Marquis of Chongqing's residence. As expected, on the night of the 5th day, the imperial guards left the Marquis of Chongqing's residence. I took the opportunity to observe the changes over these 5 days from the shadows. After all, I had gone to great lengths to bring Kui Yue into the Marquis's household, not to let her live a life of luxury. Kui Yue did not disappoint me either. During this period when the Marquis of Chongqing was overwhelmed with troubles, she played the role of the gentlest and most understanding companion, forming a stark contrast with the Marquise, who was bedridden, unable to care for herself, and behaving like a madwoman. Kui Yue even pretended to want to take care of the Marquise, but as soon as she stepped into the Marquise's room, she would feign fainting, or else, under the Marquise's furious glare, she would weakly flirt with the Marquis of Chongqing. As for the 3 children who initially took care of their bedridden mother, they all ended up hiding in their own courtyards under the pretext of fearing assassins, unable to bear the sight of their mother now with a twisted mouth, squinting eyes, and drooling uncontrollably. Staying behind closed doors was good, it allowed me to deal with them one by one. That night, I sneaked into Wen Qiantong's courtyard, since Wen Qianjing's death. The Marquis of Chongqing never said it out loud, but in his heart, he blamed his youngest son for idling around all day, which led to his murder. Now that he had already lost his second son, the most important thing was to protect his most promising eldest son. So half of the guards in his courtyard were transferred to Wen Qianjing's courtyard. Later, when Kui Yue entered the mansion, half of the remaining guards were sent to Kui Yue's courtyard, and some were assigned to the Marquis's wife for protection. Now, only 3 servants who had taken care of Wen Qiantong since childhood remained in his courtyard. In my previous life, they had also bullied me, venting their frustrations on me whenever they were scolded by Wen Qiantong. I swiftly slit the throats of the 3 men, then strolled leisurely into Wen Qiantong's room. After glancing at the room's decor, I picked the most beautiful porcelain vase from the display shelf, cradled it in my arms, and approached the sleeping Wen Qiantong. I contemplated several ways to kill him, but after much thought, decided he should die the same way as those other spoiled brats. After all, they were cut from the same cloth. With that thought, I woke him up. When Qiantong woke up and looked at me in horror, he tried to scream, only to realize his mouth was sealed shut. I tore off the mask, revealing a face identical to his. Wen Qiantong, do you recognize me? Confusion flashed in Wen Qiantong's eyes, followed by what seemed like the sight of something utterly terrifying, causing his struggles to intensify violently. He recognized me, I thought happily. Wen Qiantong and I are twins. In our previous life, he loathed the fact that we looked exactly alike. He once said, "Just because you look like me, Chen Yaro won't even talk to me anymore. I don't want to see you." Later, when I was locked away in the side courtyard, he simply joined the 3 servants in slashing my face to ruin. Now, I've stitched his eyes shut, one needle at a time. From now on, he truly won't be able to see my face anymore. When Qiantong's head, with its sewn shut mouth and eyes, was placed by me on a porcelain vase, I had intended to return it to the display shelf, but after some thought, I had a new plan. The next day, during the meal, everyone noticed that Wen Qiantong was unusually late. The Marquis of Chongqing sent someone to fetch him, only to find the courtyard gate locked and no response from within. The servant, sensing something was wrong, hurriedly reported it to the Marquis of Chongqing. The Marquis of Chongqing was so startled that he dropped his chopsticks and bowl. He rushed to Wen Qiantong's courtyard, and when the gate was forced open, everyone gasped in shock. 3 servants lay fallen in the courtyard, their blood pooling across the ground. In the center of the courtyard stood the porcelain vase that Wen Qiantong had spent a fortune to acquire. Wen Qianyao used to bring a small flower to place in it, but now, it was Wen Qiantong's head that adorned the top. Hidden among the crowd, I watched as everyone wailed and screamed, tightly covering my mouth to keep myself from laughing out loud. The Marquis's estate was shrouded in gloom. Servants who hadn't signed lifelong contracts had all fled. Qiuyue also wanted to run. But she wanted even more to become the Marquis's wife. She understood clearly that my targets were all the children of Marquis Chongqing and his wife. She even thought that if all of the Marquis's children died, the one in her own womb could inherit the title. Therefore, even though Wen Qiantong died a gruesome death, she gritted her teeth and continued to stay. Turning to Marquis Chongqing, she said, "In such a critical moment, I cannot bear to let you face it alone." The news of Wen Qiantong's death was originally kept from the Marquise, but I did not want her to be kept in the dark, so, at night, I knocked out the maids in her room, put on Wen Qiantong's clothes, and appeared before her with a face covered in blood, lady who could neither speak nor move, and could only watch helplessly as Wen Qiantong bled from all 7 orifices before her, dying with eyes wide open, tears, snot, and saliva mixed together in a mess, and I, who had been acting with great enthusiasm, suddenly grew annoyed. In my past life, I had also stood before her, covered in wounds and with a ruined face, begging her to save me, but she only ordered the maid beside her, "Lock her up properly, her appearance will frighten the young master and young lady." I spoke in a hoarse voice, "Mother, the injuries on my body were caused by them in the first place. They only wish they were more severe. Why would they be afraid, if you don't want to see me? Why did you bring me back?" The Marquis's wife frowned, and the maid beside her slapped me hard. "Peng Hao, do you admit your guilt of defying your mother and framing your siblings?" I shook my head, unwilling to admit guilt, but the maid's slap was so heavy that it filled my mouth with blood. The pain was too much, so I had no choice but to confess. My thoughts returned to the present, and I stood up, looking at the paralyzed Marchioness on the bed. She looked at me with confusion in her eyes. And then I called out to her, "Mother, do you recognize me?" As the words fell, the Marchioness looked at me with shock in her eyes, crying out "Ah, ah," from her mouth. I forced a smile, knowing she had recognized me. I wiped her face clean, tidied her disheveled hair, and then told her that Wen Qiantong had also recognized me. The Marquis immediately grasped my meaning, her face turning ashen, so shocked she couldn't even shed tears. As I rose to leave, she suddenly became agitated. I knew she wanted to ask why I hadn't killed her. I just smiled and said, "Don't worry, your turn hasn't come yet." The next day, the Dali Temple sent officials to summon the Marquis of Chongqing. The Marquis initially thought there had been progress in the case, but then, under the guidance of the Deputy Minister of Dali Temple, he encountered me. Soon, everyone in the capital learned that the 5th young lady of the Marquis of Chongqing's household, who had been missing for 18 years and was coveted by bandits, had been found. When I returned to the estate with the Marquis of Chongqing, there were only a few servants left in the household. Even many of the servants who had signed lifelong contracts had fled overnight. The first person I met was the Marchioness. When she saw me, her eyes widened with fury, but the Marquis of Chongqing beside her explained that she was simply overjoyed. I then stepped closer to the Marchioness, took her hand, and earnestly fabricated stories about my years of lonely, helpless life and the joy of finally finding my way home. The people in the Marquis' residence looked displeased. They had long known my whereabouts, but they hadn't thought to fetch me before. When they finally decided to, for some reason, they failed to bring me back. Thinking of this, the Marquis of Chongqing took me alone to his study and asked whether I had met the steward who came looking for me 4 years ago. After carefully observing the surroundings, I nodded. "Then why didn't you return with him? What happened back then?" The Marquis of Chongqing had a sharp gaze. He always felt that the child who had been found at this critical moment was not as simple as he seemed. "I killed him," I said calmly, and in the next moment, I reached out, pressed the Marquis of Chongqing's head, and slammed it hard against the desk. When Chen Cheng, who was guarding outside the door, heard the commotion and burst in, only to see the Marquis of Chongqing unconscious and an inkstone flying straight toward him. The father and son were knocked out neatly, one after the other. I walked right past them and headed straight towards Wen Qianyao's courtyard. Today, when she saw me entering the mansion, Wen Qianyao didn't treat me like a piece of filth as she had in my previous life. Instead, it seemed more like she had grasped onto some kind of lifeline. I swaggered into her courtyard and happened to catch her in the act of dismissing her maids while packing her belongings. When she saw me, she eagerly grabbed my hand, squeezing out a few forced tears. "I know you don't want to see me, sister. Over the years, even though I never intended to take what was rightfully yours, I still ended up causing you to wander and suffer for more than a decade. Are you leaving?" I interrupted her incessant chatter, when Chenyaro nodded with tears in her eyes. But there was no sadness about leaving home, only the thrill of having escaped a living hell. "That won't do." Before when Chenyaro could voice her confusion, I stuffed her mouth with a cloth torn earlier, tied her up with a belt, and dragged her by the hair toward the study. Along the way, we encountered several servants. I had planned to strangle those who had bullied me and drug the unfamiliar ones, leaving them where they lay, but as we moved forward, it turned out every last one of them deserved to die. Yeah, back then even a passing dog could take a bite out of me. When Chenyaro fainted from fear the moment I killed the first person, dragging a living person who was as heavy as a dead pig was no easy task, so I simply stabbed her in the leg. When she woke up from the pain, I said, "Walk quietly, or I'll have to take your head along to watch the fun." When Chenyaro was so terrified she wet her pants, dripping all the way as she walked, just like I did in my past life. When I reached the study, when Chen Cheng happened to wake up, I kicked him unconscious and then pointed at the two men on the ground, asking Wen Chenyao, "Who is your secret lover?" When Chenyao was 18 years old and had never been betrothed, she often coquettishly said she wanted to stay by her mother's side a little longer, and the Marchioness, doting on her, let her have her way. However, in my previous life, on the day when Chenyao accused me of offending an honored guest, it was actually because I had stumbled upon her secret rendezvous while chasing after scraps of food with the dogs. Unfortunately, at that time, I was so dizzy with hunger and was immediately pinned under someone's foot. Apart from Wen Chenyao's voice, I only remembered that the man she was meeting wore court robes and had a jade plaque with the character when hanging from his waist, something only the masters of the Marquis household possessed. At that time, the only ones from the Marquis household serving in the court were Marquis Changxing and Wen Chen Cheng. At first, I thought it was Wen Chen Cheng, because Wen Chenyao was 16 at the time, and falling in love with a man 34 years older than her was truly absurd. But after being reborn, when I saw Kui Yue, who was around the same age as Wen Chenyao, I became uncertain again, because such absurd things really do happen. When Chenyao was still pretending to be innocent, crying and shouting, "I know you resent me for taking your place, sister, but you shouldn't kill indiscriminately." I knocked out 3 of her teeth with one punch. "Who is your lover?" When Chenyao trembled as she pointed at Wen Chen Cheng. I nodded and tied her to the very tree where she had bound me in our previous life. Then, without a moment's delay, I tied up the father and son and threw them in the side courtyard. I also found a cart to transport the Marchioness to the side courtyard, and conveniently invited Kui Yue, who was about to give birth. Kui Yue was so terrified she froze. Even if I didn't tie her up, she wouldn't be able to run, so I asked her, "Do you want to become a marquise's wife?" Kui Yue was stunned for a moment, then hesitantly nodded. "Then behave yourself and don't make a fuss, understand?" This time, Kui Yue nodded like pounding garlic. Then, I set up a brazier and tossed 2 iron blocks into it, watching them burn until they were red hot, just like in my previous life, only this time, it was I who would force the iron blocks into Wen Chenyao's mouth. As the iron block approached Wen Chenyao's face, I could still smell the scent of scorched flesh. The high temperature ignited the cloth in Wen Chenyao's mouth, and her entire face burst into flames. Behind her, Kui Yue vomited all over the ground, while the Marquis of Changxing's wife on the cart emitted a foul stench from beneath her. I used the fire tongs to burn Wen Chen Cheng and the Marquis of Changxing awake, forcing them to witness Wen Chenyao's gruesome death. Wen Chen Cheng cried until his voice was hoarse, and I leaned close to the Marquis of Changxing's ear, laughing softly as I said, "Father, your most promising son and your most beloved youngest daughter have actually been having an affair behind your back for a long time." After laughing my fill, I untied Wen Chen Cheng and the Marquis of Changxing, throwing 2 daggers in front of them. "Only one person can survive in this family. You decide for yourselves." Without hesitation, Wen Chen Cheng grabbed the dagger and stabbed the Marquis of Changxing, all the while demanding why he had brought me back. In my previous life, Lord Changxing once told me that his greatest pride was the harmonious relationship among his 4 children, how they treated each other with brotherly affection and respect, something he had never experienced in his own youth. Thus, he would not allow me, his unwelcome daughter, to disrupt the peace of the Marquis's household. He ordered me confined to a remote courtyard, left to fend for myself. He clearly knew what his children had done to me, yet he merely stood silently outside the courtyard gate, watching it all unfold. In his eyes, There was even a hint of admiration for his offspring, as if he were seeing a reflection of his younger self, who, after inheriting the title, had tormented his own half-brother. When Chen Cheng, covered in blood, struggled to his feet, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate longing to live. Only one can survive in this family, I repeated. And when Chen Cheng's gaze shifted to the lady who on the cart, "Mother," he said, gripping the knife as he approached step by step, "don't blame me. Your son is now enjoying a successful official career and a boundless future. I don't want to die." In my past life, when Chen Cheng often spoke like this, when I was first brought back to the Hu residence, he said, "I'm currently thriving in my official career. I can't have a sister from the countryside, or I'll be ridiculed by my colleagues," and so I never truly returned to my roots. Later, when the scholar broke off the engagement, he said, "You've brought shame upon the Hu family. If even a poor scholar doesn't want you, the Hu family won't acknowledge you either." And so, I became someone everyone in the Hu family could trample upon, until the lady who on the plank cart breathed her last. When Chen Cheng finally turned his gaze to me again, he called out to me in a gentle, soft voice, "Little sister, from now on, your brother and I." Before he could finish his words, Kui Yue, standing behind him, picked up another dagger and plunged it into his head. I laughed heartily, clapping my hands in delight for Kui Yue. Kui Yue also began to laugh foolishly, chuckling as she said, "Only one person can survive in this family." Kui Yue rushed out of the Marquis residence with disheveled hair, telling everyone she met that the heir had gone mad, not satisfied with killing the whole family. He now wanted to kill the child in her womb. As soon as she finished speaking, she began bleeding below and immediately went into labor. By the time everyone arrived, all they saw was the side courtyard engulfed in flames, and me collapsed at the entrance of the side courtyard with a dagger still plunged in my back. I was sent to a medical clinic and managed to survive, but Kui Yue did not make it. She gave her all to give birth to a child before passing away, in just one night. The Marquis's household was left with only the newborn young master and the recently recognized young lady. Kui Yue said that there were many doubts about Wen Qianqing's sudden violent killing, but the emperor did not wish to investigate further and hastily closed the case. The son born to Kui Yue became the new heir to the Marquis of Chongqing. He would inherit the title upon reaching adulthood, and until then, all affairs of the Marquis's household were entrusted to me. The emperor also bestowed a new Marquis's residence. The constable from the magistrate's office delivered the household register. I named Kui Yue's child Wen Qianpeng, while registering myself as Qi Penghao. The former Marquis residence was soon demolished. I invited eminent monks to chant Buddhist scriptures amidst the ruins for 3 days, standing among the crowd watching. I pondered whether Buddha would save those scoundrels of the Wen family. Soon I had no time to dwell on such thoughts. Having never studied in both my lifetimes and knowing nothing but killing, I now began serving as the master of the Marquis residence, having to learn everything from scratch. The palace sent someone to teach me, but I struggled with my studies while also having to divide my attention to take care of Wen Qianpeng. Wen Qianpeng grew up in the new Marquis residence. Completely unaware of the past events, he calls me elder sister, and in this lifetime, he only acknowledges me as his one and only sister. When Wen Qianpeng was 10 years old, while studying at the Hongwen Academy, someone gossiped in front of him about the old affairs of the Marquis residence, even saying that his position as the heir was not rightfully obtained. After school, Wen Qianpeng rushed into my arms crying and asked me what it meant to be an illegitimate child. That night, I climbed into the child's room, held his neck, and forced him to drink a potion that made him mute. He could no longer gossip. I protected Wen Qianpeng, just like old Qi had protected me back in the day. I hoped he would live a long life. Besides, I killed his birth mother, so I ought to treat him well. Back then, it was I who made Kui Yue drink the labor-inducing medicine. I told her only one person in this family could survive.